What's up guys? My name's Nicole and I like to do fashion DIYs, and I know I've been super MIA lately, and that's because all the projects that I've started have not worked out. And yeah, so here I am trying again for the 100th time, it seems, and hopefully I'll have better luck this time. I don't really know why, but I always try to challenge myself, especially since I haven't posted a video in a while. I kind of want to make it something like cool and different than I've already done, but a lot of the times when I do that, I end up messing up and having nothing to show for all my hours of work. But that's okay. I'm kind of optimistic about today, although this piece is lined and I hate working with a liner. I could take it out, I might take it out, we'll see how it goes. I'm really excited about this piece because I did thrift it at Value Village, but it looks like it was already altered or manipulated in some way. It doesn't look like it's like homemade completely, but I can see on the insides all like the raw seams and stuff, so it's kind of cool that someone has already tried to upcycle this dress and now I'm trying to upcycle it again. So yeah, wish me luck, and hopefully this footage will actually be seen because I'll finish the project successfully if you do see it. Okay, bye.
Okay, here is the dress we are working with. What drew me towards this dress was the satin fabric and the combination of the mesh sleeves. I wanted to recreate something utilizing both fabric textures, and of course I am pulling inspiration from Reformation. Something with a square neckline, mesh sleeves, and a button-down front closure is what I'm going for. So clearly I have my work cut out for me. Since this dress is obviously a few sizes too big for me, I'm going to slim it down so I can give my top some shape. The first thing that I did was lay my dress down flat and pinned it to keep it flat so I can map out the princess seams I wanted to add to give the bodice some shape. The dress already had existing darts, so I measured 8 inches on either side as a guide to know where to create my seam. Using my S-curve ruler to draw out the curve and the existing neckline as a reference point, I drew out my new seam line. Then I swapped to a regular straight ruler to continue the seam line and repeated this process to both sides. Then cut along both seam lines, saving the middle piece for later. Since I'm making a top, I can trim off the extra fabric. Okay, so since I was fitting the top on myself, it makes a lot of room for error, but I just have to make do with what I got and try it on 100 times during this process. I tried on one side and I marked it with pins how much I needed to take in, which was about 1/2 inch throughout the bodice. I will also be removing the extra fabric from the sleeve/armhole. With the sleeves inside out, I marked 1.5 inches from the armhole to match how much I will be removing from the bodice, and tapered out the sleeve, then making sure the sleeve was flat by pinning before drawing out my new sew line in chalk. Then I sewed up the armhole. Once the sleeve had been adjusted, I moved on to the bodice. To do that, I flipped the shirt open to access both sides of the lining and the outer satin fabric. I will be removing the same amount of fabric from both layers, so I marked 1.5 inches in chalk at either side and in the middle, and then pinned the fabric flat before drawing my new sew line in chalk. Where the two seams meet, I used my S-curve ruler to ease my new sew line, then sewed. Then trimmed off the extra fabric and pressed the seams open. I also did the same thing to the other sleeve. Once both sleeves were done, I noticed that you could see the raw edges through the mesh, so I decided to sew onto the lining for a cleaner look. So with the sleeve inside out, I'm going to flip the raw edge towards the lining and then pin it to keep it in place. Since I don't want the stitch to be seen from the outside, I will be sewing through only the lining, aka one layer of fabric, and the sides are done. Moving on to the back paneling, I measured the distance on both of the sides, which came to roughly 3.5 inches, then placed the back of the dress in between to see how much fabric I had to work with, which was 16 inches, still keeping in mind that I still have to account for seam allowances. But before I could go any further, I had to remove this zipper. Once the zipper was removed, I lined up the top and trimmed the excess fabric and did the same thing for the lining as well. To get the right fit, I had to remove 2 inches from the back. To do that, I just pinned the two pieces of the lining with right sides together and measured out 1 inch with my ruler and chalk before trimming the excess. And repeated the same process to the outer satin fabric layer. Now it's time to attach everything together. Starting with the outside, I attached the left side panel with the left back panel, pinning right sides together before sewing. Then repeated the same process to the right side of the top. With the two sides completed, I sewed them together by pinning right sides together before sewing. So now I have something that looks like this. Before I repeat this process to the lining, I will press open all the seams for a cleaner, flatter finish. Okay, can I just say that this turned out so well. This is the lining, and then this is the outside. So the back has like a few panels, and then the tops right now are completely raw because I haven't figured out how I want the neckline to completely sit yet. And I'm probably gonna tailor in the waist a bit. I would show it to you on, but I don't have a front paneling, so basically there's no front to kind of show. Moving on to the front paneling of the top, I'm going to take the remaining front of the dress and fold it in half from the lowest point of the neckline to roughly find the middle, and then cut it in half using my fabric scissors. Now I have both of my front pieces with a lining, but for this half I need to separate the lining from the satin and trim it down to be a straight edge. So I am just trimming along the top. So I ran out of the lining fabric from the dress, so I am just going to use the mesh trim that's already attached to the lining, but I need to cut it down to use a similar size. I lined up and pinned down the edges before trimming the excess off. Now it's time to trim each panel piece to size. For the first side, I am measuring out 7 inches on the lining side and marking with chalk before cutting. On the other half, I am going to do the same thing, but measuring out 6 inches since one half will be overlapping the other. Once they are both cut to size, it was time to attach them to the rest of the shirt. Starting with the outside fabric, I pinned right sides together, being mindful that this placement does carve out my neckline, so I had to adjust it accordingly. This side also had a finished hem, so I had to seam rip the portion so I could sew all the way through to attach this side. I also attached the slightly longer side to the left-hand side and the shorter side to the right-hand side. Once that was complete, I moved on to attaching the liner. Starting with the right-hand side, I attached the lining with the right sides together, and I did the same to the other side before sewing. Now my top is officially one piece. The next thing I am going to do is tackle the neckline. So I figured the best way to maneuver this would be to pin the lining and the outer fabric all the way around the neck to keep the two layers together. I also like the general shape of the neckline. I just needed to clean it up a bit by evening everything out. I used pins as my guideline to cut and measured the distance between each side to make sure they were even before cutting. For the neckline, I wanted to sew it with right sides together so there would be no visible stitching. But because of the way I have constructed the top, I have attached the sleeves already, I will have to pull through the fabric as I sew. I also found it easier to start from the front, one side at a time. Once I got to the center back, I would stop sewing, back tack, and then go back in from the other side of the front. This did take some finessing and time, but once I finished sewing, I pressed my neckline, and now it looks like this. To reduce the bulk and the curve, I am just going to go back into the lining and create some slits so the top can lay flat. So now that I'm able to try on the top, I realize that it still needs a little more tailoring along the waist, about 1.5 inches on either side to be exact. And this is the time to do it before I complete the hem and add the buttons. So I am just redoing the steps I did at the beginning by drawing out my new seam lines on the wrong side of the lining and the satin fabric, using my S-curve ruler and then stitching along that line and trimming the excess. To finish the front, I started by removing the extra fabric on either side. I had measured a few inches that I needed to be removed and marked with chalk on either side of the lining and cut through both layers and used the pins to keep both layers flat while cutting. Since I am adding button loops to one side, I have to finish both sides differently. The left side is where the buttons are going to be, so to finish the raw seams, I just had to pin right sides together and sewed. I added a few slits around the corner for ease so it will lay flat with the right side out. For the right side, I tried the top on again so I could map out where to put the loops for my button loops and marked with pins. Then on the inside of the top, I transferred where I marked with pins because this will be the side I will be sewing from. I picked up this elastic trim at a local fabric store and trimmed it so I could use the individual loops as my button loop. The idea was to have the loop right along the sew line so it will be flush with the outside edge. So essentially I was pinning blindly, just relying on feeling around to make sure it was in place. When I was done pinning, it looked something like this, and it was time to sew a straight stitch to secure it all in place. When it was done, it looked something like this. I'm not going to lie, I had to adjust a few of the button loops after I'd sewn it. Now it's time to line up where to put my buttons, which I had figured out after I tried it on again. Then I used my chalk to mark exactly where I wanted to be sewing my buttons. So these are some black fabric covered shank buttons that I saved from a previous project, and I hand stitched them on. Now the last and final step is to complete the hem. And if you can see, the hem of this top is all different lengths at the moment, and I need to even it out. So I measured 1.5 inches below the last button and marked with chalk, and I did the same thing on both sides before using my straight ruler to draw a line connecting the two sides. Then I cut along the chalk line that I just drew. Now the bottom hem is nice and even, and I am going to draw in my hem lines for a double folded hem to ensure a clean and even hem. I use my ruler to draw a guide at the 1 inch mark and the 1/2 inch mark. I folded the raw edge to the first fold line and then folded it up once more to complete the double folded hem and pressed before sewing. Once the hem was completed, so was the top. Finally. And this is how my top turned out. This is probably my longest running project. The process of this was very slow, but I'm very happy with how this top turned out, and even more happy that this project is finally over. I've wanted to give up on this thing so many times, but I'm so happy that it's finally done. And thank you guys for watching if you've made it this far, and I promise to have more updated content for you guys this year. I am so excited for what 2020 will bring, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!